UNLV Microcertificate Economics. We're still learning our basic econ, and today's topic is rational behavior. Some terms. Anytime you take a basic class, you have to learn a bunch of terms, and we need to learn two right now. One is the term good. A good is something that makes you happy. So a good could be some new outfit you just bought. A good could be the love of your dog or your significant other. Anything that makes you happy. Economists, though, don't really use the word happiness. We don't like that happy word. We're more technical. We have our own vocab, and when you become an econ major, you'll understand where this comes from. But we use the word utility. So we say a good is something that creates utility for us. It makes us happy. Our dog creates utility. Now, among all goods, there's a certain category of goods, which are things we call economic goods. And you can tell an economic good because at least somebody out there in the world thinks that that economic good is worth paying for. If it has a price and some people are willing to pay for it, it's an economic good. That means it's scarce. Remember that the key to economics is scarcity. Things that are scarce become economic goods, and we're willing to pay for them. The opposite of a good is a bad. If it makes me unhappy, I'm a bad. But we don't really say the word unhappy. We say the word disutility. So your luggage gets lost at the airport. That's a bad, and you suffer disutility. If I'm willing to pay to get rid of it, we call that an economic bad. So an economic good is something that's scarce and I want more of it. An economic bad is something that there's too much of and I'm willing to pay to get rid of it. Now, what we do in life is to try to maximize our utility. Economists work on the presumption that your goal in life is to maximize your utility, to make yourself as happy as you can, to avoid those things that create disutility, and to get as many of those things that create utility. It doesn't mean necessarily you have to collect the most stuff. It depends on you. All of this stuff is interpersonal. You may think that rap music is a good or an economic good. I may think it's an economic bad. We all have our different points of view, our different things, and some of us maximize our utility by not having a lot of stuff. Marie Kondo. Some of us maximize our utility by having a ton of stuff. So it's an individual choice. How do we maximize our utility? But that's how economists generally look at people. And there's variations on this theme that, as you become an econ major, you'll learn about. So an economist says rational, we don't mean the same thing that a psychologist means when they say rational. Rational to an economist means you do what you think is best for you. Somebody else may think that's crazy. If you're jumping out of an airplane, you may think that that's rational maximizing behavior, and your mom might think you're crazy. So standard economic theory works on the following. We're in the world to get utility, to maximize our utility, which means in large part we're accumulating economic goods, goods in general, but economic goods in particular. That's rational behavior, maximizing our utility, doing what we think is best for us, not what other people think or what we think is best for us. Businesses face this issue of scarcity too. So businesses have to make choices. McDonald's can't cook every possible thing that any person might want. They pick certain things and those things go on their menu. If those things aren't making the money, they change the things that go on their menu. But no business, even Amazon, doesn't buy and produce and sell everything. In fact, most of what's sold on Amazon isn't actually sold by Amazon. They're a conduit for it. Businesses have to make choices. Amazon chooses what they'll sell, and then they open the door for other people to sell other things. Making choices. And businesses, they're going to maximize too. So just some more terminology. When we talk about our workers, we call them labor. When we talk about the natural resources, the ground and all of the natural resources that we use when we produce, we call that land. And then the machines, the factories and machines that we use to produce, the things that are made by people whose only purpose is to make other stuff, right? You don't buy a hammer because you think hammers are beautiful and you need a house full of hammers. You buy a hammer because you got to smash something. Capital is the factories and the machines and the tools that we create to make other things. Somebody has to bring all those stuff together. Somebody takes the land and the labor and the capital and mixes them together and makes a business. That might be Henry Ford. It might be Tony Stark. We call those people entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs take the risk. Entrepreneurs reap the reward. Henry Ford made a lot more money than the people who worked in his factory. If Henry Ford had failed, Henry Ford would have paid the penalty, where the people in the factory wouldn't have jobs anymore, but they could go off and find another job. Nobody's coming after them looking for money or to pay their loans back or whatever. So we believe that businesses are out there trying to maximize how much money they make. That's called a profit. If we didn't know that, we believe that as consumers are out there trying to maximize their utility, businesses are out there trying to maximize their profit. All told and all through this, the key to economic behavior is what we call incentives. Businesses and people respond to incentives. Incentive is something that causes you or encourages you to do something. So when your mom says, we'll pay your insurance if you get A's, that's an incentive for you to get A's. Utility, happiness is an incentive for people. Profit is an incentive for businesses. We cut taxes on businesses to try to get them to build more capital, to build more factories, to put plant and equipment in, to do things out there, or to give raises to their workers. We try to create incentives for people and businesses. So the government can create all kinds of incentives for people. The government can create an incentive for you to drive an electric car, or the government can create an incentive for businesses and power plants to burn more coal. The government can choose by how it sets taxes and rules and regulations what incentives it's going to create. And a lot of this class is about those incentives. So really quick, just a blurb here as we finish up to remind ourselves of something, and that's about science. We want to, you don't think of the Constitution as being science, and it's not science in the sense that we don't have, test tubes and things, but as we talk about theory and we talk about what this means or what that does, science gives us a way to look at things. And that way means that we have to be able to test whatever hypothesis we state. So if we say this means this, or they did this, or that had this effect, or this is the way the world is, we need evidence to support or refute our hypothesis. A hypothesis that's just stated of blah, this is the way it is, the Earth's flat. Okay. What evidence do you have? Has anybody fallen off the edge recently? Are those pictures from space faked? What evidence do you have? Okay. So just think that whenever we're having that discussion, or wherever, I say something, or your classmate says something, or you're thinking something, what's the evidence to back that up? And a little side note on that is that no one in science ever believes that a theory has been proven. Scientists believe you can disprove theories. You can prove that the world isn't flat, but that doesn't automatically mean that you've proved something else. You can't prove something. You can disprove theories, but you can't prove them. So we believe you can't go faster than the speed of light. And so far, all the theories, all the tests that have been done have failed to disprove that. That doesn't mean that we have proved it. It means we haven't disproved it. All right, some things to know. Economics is a social science. There's multiple kinds of sciences. Physics and chemistry and biology, those are physical sciences. We run, experiments. We believe, if you drop a rock off the top of the Empire State Building, you can measure stuff about gravity. And generally speaking, if you drop a rock today and you drop a rock a week from now, you should get the same result. Economics is a social science. That means fundamentally under our science is human behavior. And human beings next week might act differently than human beings did this week. We also know that human beings respond to incentives where rocks don't generally respond to incentives. There's tons of psychological experiments that people have done over time, right? You take little kids, you put them one at a time in a room, you put a treat in front of them on the desk in front of them, and you say, I'm going to leave the room, and you can eat that treat if you want to. If you don't, and I come back and you haven't eaten it, I'll give you 2. Well, turns out some kids will eat the treat and some kids won't. And then they watch those kids for the next 20 years. And apparently the kids that didn't eat the treat did better over life than the kids who did. Now, an economist would look at that and go, hey, that's meaningless. Statistically speaking, you learn nothing. And in fact, psychologists kind of know that they learn nothing from that experiment now. The trick is, how do you get there? Where do you go? How do you do good science? How do you know what means what? And we have a lot to work to do on that. But we're a social science. To do our job, economists use models. A model just means we simplify the world. We don't try to include all the complex elements and complex behaviors of the entire world when we analyze something. We try to get rid of many of them. And so, for example, if I use the model on the left, I have a model that looks like an airplane, but if I throw it, it's not going to fly like an airplane. So if I'm trying to look at things about, how do seats work or where the doors go, maybe that's a good model for that. On the other hand, if I want to look at a little something about how an airplane flies, the one on the right doesn't look like much of an airplane. And if there was a giant one of those and you were supposed to get in it to fly to Denver, you wouldn't. But it flies more like a plane than the one on the left. So we need to decide what we're going to study, and then we need to figure out the best model to study that. What can we ignore? What can we simplify and still make sense of the world with? Okay? So there's a couple parts to this. One is what we call positive versus normative. Positive economics means we study what is. Normative means we try to figure out what ought to be. Economists don't like normative. We don't like starting out with the presumption that, hey, poverty is bad, or people should earn a living wage, or making a statement like that. What we want to do is look at what the effect of changing wages is on people's lives, and then from there we can draw a conclusion. But you don't want to start with a conclusion. Normative people start with a conclusion, kind of, and then go back and look at it. Positive people go, what's the effect of raising the wage from $10 to $12 an hour, or to $15 an hour, or whatever that is? And then we look at what the actual effect of that is, and then we can make recommendations about policy. We can talk about it, but we looked at it independent of our own preconceptions as best we can. So we want to be positive. We don't like being normative. Ultimately, there's no way you can actually separate all your, you know that. But we try, right? We try really hard to study things without making determinations ahead of time of what we think is right or wrong or good or bad or what ought to be. In general, we divide economics into two broad categories. One is called macroeconomics and one is called microeconomics. Macro is the big picture. Macro is, why is there unemployment lines? Why is 5% of the population unemployed? Why are prices going up? Not a price. Why are, in general, prices going up? Why is the economy getting bigger or smaller? Right? It's the big picture. Microeconomics is the little picture. Why is that Taco Bell doing better than the Del Taco down the street? Why is that worker employed and this worker not employed? So obviously these two things are related, but we tend to separate our subject out into the big picture things and the little picture things. Okay? And economists tend to call themselves macroeconomists or microeconomists.